Well, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Very nice to be with you all on this fine Friday. This is Brian Kozlowski, joined by my colleagues Liz Severance and Susan DiPiceri. And we're going to talk to you all about something very close and near and dear to our hearts, which is measuring the unmeasurable when it comes to talent. And when we are on this topic, it's always a hat tip to our founder, Jim Ware, because over 20 years ago now, when he started thinking about culture, that was one of the questions he was trying to solve is how do we measure what was previously thought as being unmeasurable? So where are we going today? So we're going to talk about three key topics, and we're going to give you one thing to think about. Are you leaving talent decisions up to chance? It's funny, in an industry where data is so important, oftentimes we hear folks making decisions without data. So why is that? And are you doing that today? We'll ask you that question. Then we'll share some tips and some tools that we use to measure the unmeasurable when it comes to talent. And then lastly, we'll talk a little bit about diagnostic success. So I know a lot of you over the last 2 years have done surveys. All three of us come from what I'll call a deep background in surveys. So we'll share some of the tips that we have on running effective surveys with your organization. So Liz, why are people leaving these key decisions up to chance?
Thanks, Brian, and hi, everyone. So Brian's right. In an industry that is always focused on data, many organizations are leaving your biggest asset, which is your talent decisions, up to chance. And why do they do that? So a couple of reasons that we have seen in our experience and what we've heard. The first is that people are trusting their gut. You know, traditionally, decision-making in organizations has been about experience and has been about instinct. And that is actually one of the primary reasons that most small businesses and startups fail, is because people are relying solely on their experience and their gut and what has gotten them usually very successful up to that point. But research tells us that if you actually combine both data and your instinct, so we're not dismissing instinct by any means, but if you combine it, you're actually 19 times more likely to be profitable. Why? Because the world is changing and the world is constantly changing, and our customers change and our clients change, and we don't typically change. So one of the ways to get around those biases is to be able to also get data, which is unbiased information. Many of you know who Daniel Kahneman is, Nobel Prize winner, right? And he basically says and claims that using data to make decisions is absolutely critically important because our propensity is to make, poor ones if we don't use data. The second reason that people tend not to use data and leave your talent decisions up to chance is because of what is called fact versus story. Many of you at Focus know that we talk a lot about what is fact and what is story, story being your own opinions, right? Instead of basing your decisions on fact, it's the opinions and stories, not just your own, but other people's in the organization. What you're hearing in the organization, right, are your stories, and people make decisions based on those. What's the problem with that? Well, the problem is that typically you're only hearing the loudest voices, right? So when you hear the loudest voices, what are you getting? Only a small amount of a tremendous amount of data. So you're missing so much information, and yet you are making decisions based upon this skewed data. So we say you got to go ahead and start measuring what traditionally has been unmeasurable. The first one that we talk about is organizational health. What is organizational health? Well, a lot of people know Focus is started with culture, right? Well, we know in the last, more than 20 years we've been around, that it is more than just culture, it's organizational health, that a big part of that is culture. And so we have a tool that actually measures your organizational health. This makes you absolutely have an organization by design, not default, right? So you're thoughtful and you're planning, and this is the way that you get there. It's kind of what we call, and our partner calls, the answers to the test. What do you need to focus on? What do you need to do? What are your strengths? What are your gaps in your organization that need to be addressed? And this provides you with that opportunity. So you really want to look at those things. So what you see here is actually what we measure on our organizational health survey. We look at these different building blocks of organizational health. And yes, it might look familiar because Maslow has talked about, building blocks of people and of families and all that good stuff. It also applies to organizations. So we look at the bottom rung, which is safety and security. What are those things that matter to people to make them feel safe and secure in their organization, right? We break down questions that look at this particular area, such as diversity. Do we have a diverse organization? Is our organization supportive of diverse environments or inclusive environments? Am I feeling safe to ask questions? Do I feel safe in my job? That has never been more tested in those last couple of years, that people have felt that lack of safety. And we know that in organizations, in order for you to be successful, people have to feel safe and secure. Once they feel that, we look at belonging and connection. Do you feel people connected to a team, right? Connected to each other? Again, one of those areas that people have felt really needing, even our introverts, feeling that connection has been so important. Knowledge workers. We're all knowledge workers. You're in the knowledge industry, and people want to get better and better and better. So we look at how do organizations do, making it an environment that is all about people getting better at their craft. And what you see to the side are some of those questions and how we break it out to see how your organization is doing on mastery and development. And then finally, that top rung of purpose and meaning. We know now, and all the research shows, people want to feel connected to something bigger than themselves and bigger than their day-to-day. How is the organization doing to connect their people to things that are bigger than themselves, so that they know that what they do actually matters to the big scope of things? We also look at values, right? Those types of values and behaviors that are guiding the organization, because that's part of your culture. Those things that you have currently in your organization, those values and behaviors, as well as the ones you want in the future. Because it's really important that people understand culture, organizational health is not a project. It is ongoing. And so you have to know what people are looking at in the future, as well as your organization changes and the world around us changes. We look at those things that are bringing you down. Are there behaviors in the organization that are slowing you down? We look at, people talk about engagement. We do look at engagement. We look at it from a couple of different points, but also from loyalty. How sticky are your people? Or are they actually calling recruiters or have one foot out the door? Important information. And then again, organizational health is about what we call success factors. How are you doing in communication, decision-making, collaboration? These are all measurable things that you need to know in order to have strong organizational health. The other thing we do in organizational health is we talk about strategy. Brian, what do we look at when we want to measure strategy in organizations?
Yeah, thanks, Liz. So you think of the organizational structure, with culture being one pillar, strategies the other. So we want to know a couple of things from a quantitative perspective. A, how well is the strategy understood generally? B, how well do I really understand it as applies to me? So do I know what it is? And then can I apply it to my day-to-day life? Do I understand how I'm helping to drive the success of the firm? And then another element is how well is it communicated? And those three types of questions allow us to dig behind, well, if there are certain pieces of the data that we're finding, how do we help correct those? And because these are the core pillars, it allows us also to evaluate a rewards approach. So really what we're trying to drive at is the fairness. So how fairly do I feel paid, and how well is the approach applied? Transparency, how well do I understand it? and the simplicity. How well is it understood across the organization? So through a diagnostic tool between strategy and rewards, we can help a firm really drill down on areas that A, may be impacting their culture, and or B, that are spots that needed additional attention.
So you have the organizational level, but we also know that teams are what really drive organizations, right? They drive the culture in the organizations. And so team engagement and effectiveness is extremely important to whether or not an organization is successful and an organization is retaining and attracting their top talent, which is what it's all about, right? And so you want to be able to measure how engaged is your team, any intact team, and how effective are they being. So we use 24 factors. They are well researched for predicting the engagement and effectiveness of an intact team. What we know though is you can't focus on all 24. So you have to know what's important to your team, what's important to the teams in your organization, because your organization is unique from everybody else's, right? You want to find that edge. You need to know that edge. So this tool really helps you not only define how well your teams are engaged and effective, but also what areas are so important to the team that these are the areas, one, you want to leverage, upper green box in the right? Those things that are going really well that you want to leverage, and those things that actually are really meaningful to the team, but you're not as skilled at, you're not doing as well in the bottom right, and be able to move those into an area where all those things that are important to the team, really vital and critical to the team's success, are being addressed. So we've got the organization, we have the team, and now we look at the individual. And what's important is that we are getting information on the individual for many reasons. Two of the most important are development and succession, right? So with regards to our tool for measuring the individual, we use a 360, and you want to get information all from people around this individual. So you know how this person is impacting up, down, and across from them, right? Their peers, their direct reports, potentially their bosses, how they do all along the organization. And what you want to look at is competency. What competency factors are important to you at your organization? So these are, again, you want to customize. You want to be able to ask the things that are important to you. And we're going to talk about this actually when we look at what success factors are for diagnostics, because you want to measure the things that are important to you. But not only do you want to see how people are being experienced in the organization, how they're being observed in the organization on these competencies, but you also want to point out blind spots. You need to be able to highlight those blind spots, because in order for a person to be able to develop, you've got to shine a light on blind spots. And if you look at the definition of blind spots, people don't know them unless you shine a light on them, unless you tell them. So feedback for people as they're developing on those competencies that are important to you is extremely important for their development. And what we look at, and this actually shows a circumplex of the competencies that you look at, how people do on those competencies, but then that black line shows you actually where the individual rates themselves. So you can see, are they aware of how people are experiencing them in this organization? Do they know what their strengths are? Do they know what their blind spots are? Do they know what their gaps are? And how are they going to address them? Extremely important as you go through. You can imagine for development and succession, which Brian's going to talk about when we talk about managing our talent portfolio.
Yeah, the talent portfolio, the topic of talent succession has really never been more important. And as managers and organizations try to get the right people in the right seats at the right time, This chart is a step towards helping them to be able to do it. So through quantitative measures, through quantitative and qualitative questions, we look at we help managers assess their talent portfolio across three metrics: competence, what an individual is doing; contribution, how they're doing it; and the criticality of both the individual and the role. And putting all that data together, you get a chart that looks like this one, which is the heat map. And across the x-axis, you have the criticality of the individual. So the acronyms you see there represent the score for each of the individuals that are on your team. So those are the items running down the right side of the chart on a 1 to 5 scale. You then, across the y-axis, you get the contribution. And what you're aiming to do is get a holistic picture of your team, where folks are, who's critical, who's a high contributor, as you're trying to move them from bottom to top across the arrow. Try to get them into the green zone. How do you get people and how do you motivate people to be highly critical and highly competent? What a chart like this also allows you to do from a data gathering perspective is you look at something like DAS with a 2.49. So here's an individual who is he or she is a high contributor, but maybe they're not in a highly critical role. So what does that mean? Well, there are two things. A, person could be a flight risk in that, yeah, I'm not really being challenged. It's time for me to try something else. Or, hey, we're thinking through, and professional development is something we get consistent feedback on, whether it be the culture survey or a reward survey on, we want more of it. We want more of it. Here's an individual to really focus on and say, how would we develop this person to get them into a more critical role because they are contributing at a high level. So the heat map, which I remember from my days as a manager, this was done much without data, was much more anecdotal. This allows you in a quantitative way to assess your team, to give you a sense of where your hotspots are, and to really proactively and strategically think about how you want to manage your talent portfolio. And I can't say it enough. The time we're in now, it has never been more important to assess your talent this way.
Hi, thanks everyone. So thanks Brian and Liz. They spent a good amount of time really talking about measures to help navigate important decisions regarding your talent. But I always tell people after working in the sort of data industry for 25 years now, your output is really only good as your input, and your input is your survey. So you can kind of see here to the right, we're like, oh no, another survey. What can that possibly be? You can sort of see people, doing their eye rolls. Well, we have some really great tips and best practices for sort of helping to eliminate that. And the first one is really getting buy-in from the top, right? Leaders have to be the ones driving this process. We recommend that the CEO or one of the leaders of the organization initially send out a kickoff email, just sort of describing the process and the importance of the survey. We also ask maybe midway through that survey process that they send out another sort of reminder email. It really helps communicate the importance that they truly care, and this is very important to the organization. Second is ensuring confidentiality, and this is such an important piece. People have to feel that they can provide information anonymously. What this does is if people feel more comfortable giving the information, it not only boosts your responses and the quality of your responses, but also your completion rates as well. So don't underestimate confidentiality and making people feel comfortable. The next is really being clear on your purpose. Don't just survey for the sake of surveying. Be clear on the purpose of your survey and focus in on those key areas that you really want to measure. Next is also asking for the information that you will use. Don't ask for more than you can handle. And so what we sort of mean by that is only include those questions that you plan on building actionable plans on. And that's really kind of leading us into the next one, is develop an action plan, right? So what you really want to do is take a look at all of your survey data and really figure out how you're going to not only develop an action plan, but also communicate that action plan back to the organization. Knowing and not acting is worse than not knowing at all. So communicating the results of your surveys, select and share areas of improvement, then make changes moving forward.
So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And I want to thank my colleagues, Brian and Susan. This is a topic that's near and dear in my heart with regards to diagnostics, because I really think it provides an edge to organizations so that they can really focus on what they need to leverage. Finding out your strengths is almost just as important as finding out your gaps. And so what you can leverage, what you need to work on, and it provides you with, I hate to say it, some focus on what you should be doing. So to hear this recording, send it on. Please visit our website, focuscgroup.com. It's under our thoughts and hit it and quit it. Our next hit it and quit it, speaking about measuring the unmeasurable. Keith Robinson is going to talk about our focus selection process. This is about hiring for fit. What you should be looking for is you bringing talent into your organization. And yes, it is measurable. And Keith will talk to us about how we do that. If you're interested in joining our distribution list, please just let Laura know at lauraerkley@focuscgroup.com, and you'll get all of our notices. Again, thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time, and have a great weekend.